Awesome. So it's actually very interesting to see so many people joining in from so many locations. I mean, so I used to work right across the street from where SVPMA ran a lot of its events in the Tech Mart area because I used to work for Citrix. And when I was there, I would actually try my best to kind of attend as many sessions as possible. Then ended up moving to the East Bay. So I live in Dublin right now, and our studio is in Pleasanton. So I think, all the East Bay folks, really good to see some more names in there. And then obviously it kind of cut down, but I've had a lot of respect for what you guys are doing in the association, and obviously the Prague campus is a great thing. So thank you again for having me. The way I've structured this is it's hard to kind of not have a discussion because it's hard to track who's asking questions at what time, who's raising. So I'm going to give enough strategic gaps in between. So if there's anybody has any questions, we will collate that and then answer them right in a couple of strategic points of the talk. And then I'll also leave significant time at the end for us to have a discussion. So most of the stuff I will share today will be predominantly, I would say, thought triggers. And the discussion will be the richer part of where I think we will kind of see some good alchemy happening. So again, thank you. I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's kind of front and center for me. Personally, I've been in this career for about 2 decades. I always tell the story. I started this profession even before UX was UX. I studied a discipline called human factors engineering. And at that point, the jobs that you would get at human factors engineering was in defense, designing medical systems or healthcare systems or defense systems. And then .com happened, and then everything kind of changed, and then humans and machines were defined in very different manner, the web also being defined as a machine interface. In fact, Apple still calls a lot of its designers human-machine interface folks. So it's an interesting aspect. But then I always tell the story that I started my career and in the first meeting, it was the company was moving towards agile. And then I went and I said, I'm a UX designer. And he said, and the Scrum Master looked at me and said, what? I said, I'm a UX designer, user experience designer. And he's like, okay, what do you code in? And I said, I don't code. I give you these wireframes and I give you these workflow diagrams. And he said, so you just do boxes and arrows and that's your profession? And I said, that is my profession. Right, so that was 2003. Again, fast forward, it's a long time back now, and a lot has changed. A lot has changed, and I think looking back, a lot has changed in a good way, and I think a lot has still not changed in aspects that we still look at. So, what you'll see here is a perspective from that aspect. Presently, I've co-founded and I run a pretty reasonable sized design firm. Located in 3 continents at this point, but headquartered in Pleasanton, and predominantly focusing on driving clear business value through the design practice, the way it should be done. So we kind of get involved in a full stack design. So a lot of our aspects is very much like how do we work with product managers and engineers to kind of get things to fruition. So that's the journey on a high level. Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to go to business school, design school, and engineering school. So kind of have an interesting mix of 3 aspects. I'm a trained engineer in electronics engineering, and then obviously went to school to study human-centered design, and then also went to business school to kind of understand that aspect. It's a different story. I went to business school wanting to be a business guy, ended up kind of coming back to double down on design. And it's a different story we can always have with a glass of beer one day. So that said, why are we here, right? So when you look at product management, and this is interesting because the profession of product management and design or user experience have actually evolved around a similar time frame. And I think both of them, the pivotal moment has been how the .com boom happened, and suddenly technology was everywhere. It was started with web, then mobile, and so on. And everybody was doing it. Every product had to have an extension of it. I mean, you go to restaurants, you're still looking at self-service kiosks. And I think COVID is only going to change that further with kind of more contactless experiences and so on. But our whole focus, and when you look at the two professions of UX and product management, the whole focus has been that we want a successful product that customers love, right? And I'll highlight a couple of items here. Successful product that customers love, right? And it's a simple proposition, but a proposition that we get wrong multiple times. In fact, the most recent CB Insights report consistently has said the number one reason why startups fail is market fit. And number 6 reason is because you kind of went with a bad experience. And out of 20 reasons why startups fail. And that's kind of an interesting insight that, first of all, if you do not know your customers, you probably are building a product. So when you say product market didn't fit, you kind of start looking at an aspect of you did not build the right product for the right user, and why were you not experimenting enough? And if that's 70% of the time, then there is a fundamental problem there. And whether that's a product management thing, a UX thing, or a founder thing, it's whoever it is, someone has to take accountability for such a huge amount of failure. But the factor is that we want to build successful products. We want to build products that customers love, and customers actually are constantly telling us that they don't like a product or they don't like an experience, and so on and so forth. So the need is there, but somewhere it's kind of not mapping. So at this time, I just want to kind of do a quick poll, just to kind of get a sense of a couple of topics that I wanted to get a sense from everyone. So I know, Tom, you're going to be facilitating that poll for the group.
So you should have that up on your screen. If not, you may have to poke your windows around, but we do have the first poll up, and about 20% of you and counting are currently weighing in.
A quick question for the aspiring PMs. Should we abstain?
No. We design products for a lot of folks. It's actually interesting. And I would say it's a mindset. Product management and UX design, or design overall, is a mindset. And I think that's the reason why I would say, put it at any perspective that you have.
Thank you.
All right, get your votes in. We have 30 seconds left here. We got about 3/4 of you responded so far.
Awesome.
Let this go through. So you should have found the window. It's only 2 questions, folks. All right, 10, 5, 4. Jeopardy music is starting. All right, and here we're going to end the poll. And I can share the results back out to everyone here. You should see that popping up in this similar window.
So it's interesting, right? So the first question that we are looking at is, how much time do you spend understanding the needs of a customer? By far, it looks like this group is an exception. Typically, 40% of the products are shipped without, that was the most recent report that McKinsey actually did a pretty comprehensive research. 40% of the products actually get shipped without even talking to one user, right? So now here we have a group of people, and that's actually, and you see this with a lot of founders who are kind of, again, I call it the founder's paradox, which is like, I'm the founder, I know what problem I'm solving, therefore I'm going to do it, and then the customers will love it. And unfortunately, that is a strategy, but the strategy that is, rife with a lot of risk. And, that's the factor. But the fact when you have more than 72% here looking at understanding customer needs and driving that's a winning proposition to a large extent. So that's awesome that this group is in that situation. And then the fact that its design is actually now becoming more in-house, it's kind of a centric process, and it kind of is a skill. It's also great to kind of hear where that is. So again, thank you for taking the poll to keep this moving. So I'm going to go through a thought exercise, right? And this is interesting because a lot of times I use the word experience, and people think about it in so many ways. So this thought exercise is going to be I'm going to flash a word on the screen, And just in your mind, if you can visualize what that word kind of means to you. So that's just the experiment that we're going to run. And then I'm going to show you an image and then we'll see how that plays out. So the first word that I want to talk about is the MRI experience. So this is the MRI experience when you go to a hospital. And most people think about this, right? They think about an experience where, you know, you're going to an hospital, you're wearing a PPE, as we all know, everyone knows it. And you are going through this process and it's a fairly overwhelming experience because there's a machine that's kind of huge machine that goes around you and so on and so forth. But when you start looking at it from an experience where you start looking at someone designed this experience, and especially when you look at it in context to the users being children who are dealing with cancer, and especially kids who are in their toddlers and early preteens, how do you kind of create an experience that they actually want to go through this, right? And then the parents have to kind of coax them to kind of get there. You suddenly start thinking about it from so many facets, like, you know, who's the user? What are we doing? How do we kind of create a story around it? The same machine is now an orchestrated experience. Now, what is interesting is, and this is one thing I would like you kind of just to reflect back, most times in most companies, we build experiences as I run this product, I run this design area, and so on and so forth. But to kind of bring an experience like this together, you really have to kind of work with your interior design, your biomedical engineers, you have to work with, you know, your staffing. It's truly an orchestration with so many different aspects that come together. So again, when I kind of brought the word MRI experience, you know, you think about this. A gentleman named Doug Dietz is one of the, you know, of formative members at GE Healthcare who kind of came up with this aspect with a lot of customer research that he did with people in the children's hospital. So again, the factor is when you look at MRI experience, there's an experience that we all know, and there's an experience that actually is kind of thought through a much more deeper level. The next word that I want to, that I'm flashing right now is the thermostat installation experience, right? And typically, you know, that's what it is. So that's what it was for the longest while, that you're looking at a thermostat, you pull it up, there's a lot of wires and it comes across. But when you start looking at it on a different level, and at least and it's the way it's been done, when Nest came out with its first thermostat, obviously it was a beautiful UI. It actually had the dial, it had a great format. But the more important aspect was there was the installation experience. There was a website, there was a video, you could take a picture, they spoke to you about the journey that you would go through kind of installing it. The kit had it. Now, in order to kind of really pull out this experience, you had to work with your packaging designers, obviously your UI designers, your website designers, your media developers. There's just orchestration again on a very different level, right? And again, a factor of, it takes a lot of deliberate effort to kind of design experiences like this. And more importantly, the willingness to do it, right? And you'll start realizing that the larger the company, the more the silos are, and therefore they never actually place out. For me, I'll just give you a quick anecdotal story. I mean, you drive a Tesla and you drive an Infiniti. The Tesla, when you design an experience, you actually know it because you have your music, you know, playing at high volume. You open your door, the music automatically kind of lowers the volume. When the door system automatically connects with the software system. Now, when you compare that with the Infiniti experience, when you actually, the industrial design team, the automotive design team, and the software design team haven't discussed it. And just like most companies, they've all done it have done it in their own aspect, designed it in their own structure, and then brought it together. And then the customer has to figure out, you know, how many dials do you have, which click do you do where? And there are two aspects. There's a software way of doing it, a hardware way of doing it. It's really not thought through, even though it's a premier brand that's kind of selling it. And again, it takes a lot of energy to kind of orchestrate an experience. And the last one I'm going to share here is retail banking experience, right? So most retail banking in the United States typically is like this. It still is a fairly friendly environment. You kind of do it, you're kind of engaging in the retail. You go to the bank, the banker is working with you. But when you start looking at some of the new things that's happening right now, some of the banks have started moving towards like, you know, we're going to make it a very friendly and warm experience where you can come have coffee. And then in order to orchestrate this experience, You have to have bankers working with baristas, working with interior designers, working with furniture designers. You're just talking about a very different construct, right? So now suddenly you're starting to look at, experiences are moving to a very different level. And that's kind of where we are at the cusp of, there's a lot of digital transformation, and then we need to start to talk about where are people's expectations going for the same systems. So the foundational aspect that I will say is the people care more about experiences than features. I've seen when we work with a lot of our projects and our clients, we've seen so many times that, literally 20 to 30% of the features that have been built, customers don't even know about it or they don't care about it, right? And so what's the challenge is that, they always have that one issue like, hey, I'm not able to do this or I'm not able to do that. And most times if the customer doesn't find the feature that we have built for them, it might as well not have built it for them because they never find it, they never use it. So, and you're charging for that, you put money for it. But then experiences, of course, they feel it every day, and they talk about it, they engage with it. And that's the most important part of experiences that we need to talk about. Now, one question that always comes up is, what exactly is the definition of an experience? Right? And the best definition I've gotten is from Oxford Dictionary, which kind of literally states that an event or an occurrence that leaves an impression, right? And when we start looking at this, we start looking at the perspective that anything that we are doing, whether that's in product, whether that's in design, whether that's engineering, whether that is how we do our marketing documentation, everything that we do around it is an event and an occurrence that leaves an impression. That's an experience. If the person walks in there and the marketing message is, we got you, we have you figured out here, that is an experience. They kind of, oh, okay, these people understand me. And then if the product kind of continues to work through that. A lot of times this is where we kind of break up and we don't actually end up delivering the value because one team is working really well, the other team is not working so well, or they're not in cohorts together. So I'm going to share two more slides and then we can open it up for some Q&A. So the key question that always comes up is, and you'll see this in the profession, a lot of people would use the thing, and again, not for any fault of theirs, they would use the word UI, UX together, right? And UI, UX are like two different aspects of it. And unfortunately, a lot of times people say UX, but they're thinking UI. And that's a foundational problem that happens a lot of times. But if you really look back into the deliberateness of how actually this experience value chain is kind of constructed, it's actually the user interface. How exactly is it saying the message, the talk, everything else? That's kind of the UI itself. That's all the buttons, the look and feel. That's UI. There's a lot of people who can do that, and that's actually getting commoditized really fast. The UX part of like, do you know who your user is? Do you actually know their workflows? Do you know what their pain points are? That's all the UX side. And when you start looking at it on an experience as an organization level, when you start looking at, is the marketing team equally as worried about the customer as much as the sales team is worried about the customer? And they're all worried about the same aspects of the customer. And that's when you're truly looking at an experience transformation. So think of what Zappos did early on, when they actually said that, the empathy of the user, what we call the quotient, empathy quotient of the organization, which is foundationally where you walk into an organization, you need to feel empathy to the person you're building this product to, whatever level you are in. And what Zappos did was they actually said, irrespective of the level, the first 1 week of your job at Zappos, and I don't know if they're still doing it after they got acquired by Amazon, but the factor was that first 1 week you would take calls in customer service. And everybody, whether you're a VP of finance or you're a VP of logistics, you actually end up taking customer calls. And that's how you build your empathy quotient for what you're solving for. And that makes you work and engage very differently. And we've seen those stories where you have a highly engaged team with a passion for the customer, they will make magic happen. But a lot of times, unfortunately, you get requirements and designers will design the requirement, then they give it to engineering, engineering will design it that way. It's a very much a bad way of building an experience, and then you start seeing that aspect. Like, even though we have the right intents as PMs and design, we still kind of ship bad products out there. And typically when you kind of root cause it, you kind of start seeing it in this aspect. The focus is too much on the UI. right? And you want to focus more on like, do you know your customer? Are you eating, sleeping, and drinking that customer problem? And more importantly, are you doing it organizationally, right? And this is one aspect that you will notice automatically when you start looking at org designs, right? Who actually runs experience as an organizational vision, right? There's a chief marketing officer who's constantly talking to users. There's a chief revenue officer who's constantly talking to users. There's a chief product manager who's constantly talking to users. But who actually is orchestrating between them that they're actually shipping the right experience? And that's where the biggest fail happens. If the CEO is not experience-centric, if they're sales-centric, then they will apply it that way. And then you start seeing the cascade of how experiences kind of evolve. And that's what is the layer of experience transformation, when you start moving from the layer of saying that I'm building features to actually I'm building experiences. So I want to quickly, actually, let me go through one more slide. And this is actually an interesting, so we did an analysis on our end, where we would get clients talking to us, and we said, irrespective of what the semantics are, whether it's a UI, UX, or experience transformation, let's see what they say, how they describe the problem. And then we collated a bunch of different phrases that came out of those conversations across the time we've been engaging with our clients or in the industry. And then you start realizing, so I'll kind of call out a few aspects here, right? We often get phrasing like, it's only one screen, when can I get the wireframe? Right? And that means the foundationally you're looking at as a UI, like, can you just quickly put together screens with, form fields and buttons and so on, so and just give it to me, right? On the flip side, you also say that our users are saying this. That means you're kind of, again, bringing the users in every conversation. That's a UX conversation, right? When you say that the design is not contextual and personalized, like, of course, I mean, I don't know what the context is. I'm going to study the context. I'm going to study who the user is. So again, it's user-centric and user's experience that you're building. And then more importantly, when you start going to the experience transformation side, you start looking at like, my development team doesn't even know why they're building this, right? And that's actually when you start looking at, this is truly a case, a lot of the development team, after you started offshoring, after you've started building a lot more globalized teams, they don't feel the same empathy as a PM is actually feeling it, or a user researcher is feeling it, because they don't feel the same sense of empathy to the problem. And this is, again, a fundamental issue that I would say that has to be solved, where you need to kind of find ways and techniques that everyone kind of feels it the same way, right? You'll also get clients coming and saying, can you just copy what Uber did, right? Okay, fine, I'll copy what Uber did. And that just ends up becoming a UI project, right? And then unfortunately, a lot of times we still see a lot of companies. I think the Valley is a little bit different, but I think outside the Valley, you'd still see a lot of people talk UX, but do we think UI? And that's basically a foundational mismatch, and also how that kind of cascades on. So last piece here before we open up for Q&A, we are going through an experience transformation. There were physical products before, there were physical businesses and processes that moved to digital, and there's a huge digital focus right now with everything happening. The biggest case was what happened with the PPP loans right now with the federal government. It's all online. They gave a form, a digital form, a PDF form that actually you can fill and submit online, but the experience was horrific. Right? People are upset, people are angry. The experiences were not thought through, right? It was foundationally just saying that I put it online, just put your document. What document? You're saying, give me my 3 months of payroll document. What does that look like? Does that change for if I'm an ADP customer versus a TriNet customer? And then you start looking at other people orchestrating it. Then there's a whole marketplace coming in with people, and then scams start happening. There's a whole process because someone didn't think through that experience. And honestly, a lot of times when you think about experience design, it is just a little bit more deliberate thought. It's not like you have to spend like 6-7 months. It's just like, you spend one cycle to do that. It actually will get you so much more clear. But the factor is that digital transformation is something that you need to do, but experience transformation is something that you need to thrive. So that's basically the biggest aspect that we need to, as we continue to kind of build more and more products and features in any realm of work. So I think this is a good time to take a quick, break and talk about any Q&A that may be coming up.
Sorry, that took me entirely too long to scroll through all the names to find my own name. You had one additional poll. Did you want me to launch that for folks?
That's a little bit later. I have a cue card for that, so we'll get to that.
Sure. Okay. I know we had one question come in via the chat window, and that was, how does the design experience differ between B2B and B2C product? Since most of the really common examples are more consumer oriented. So wondering about how that differs from a B2B product or service experience.
So we actually have a pretty sizable practice in the B2B system design side. So I'd say where you kind of are looking at multiple actors, multiple personas, engaging in a lot of different contexts. B2B and B2C are two different, two different contexts, but the way you approach it is not very different. I mean, you look at both of them having users, they have their own dynamics at play, and then you're looking at how do they actually engage. B2C, the consumer obviously is king because that's much where the volume of users are. So again, if you're looking at a Twitter, that's the person, the consumer is the person who's tweeting, but there's so many more B2B aspects of that particular experience. But the simple aspect is when you're looking at user-centered design, you're looking at anybody who's a user, whether it's a consumer or it's an enterprise specialist user, doesn't matter. You're using the same techniques of understanding their journeys, their motivations, their goals, and then designing different experiments around it and testing it out. There's pros and cons. B2C, you can rapidly test ideas. I was to work for PayPal a while back. Literally, I mean, you could go walk across the parking lot and then find, talk to 5 people and 2 of them would have used PayPal. And Citrix wasn't that case. When we were designing and researching for Citrix, you couldn't find those users. So that means you have to kind of be much more deliberate building those user advisory boards and being deliberate about that aspect. But the factor is you're still trying to get data from them. You're still trying to test prototypes with them and constantly keep having a cycle of closed loop of, you understand the needs, you design it, you can iterate, you ship, you can again iterate. And so that to that extent, it's not very different. The UI layer, of course, is very different. So the UX layer, I don't think is as much different. The UI is the form factors are much lesser. You go minimalistic for, if you don't go minimalistic for a consumer, they probably will quickly run away. And then whereas for the enterprise side, there is a lot more data intensiveness that's kind of, that's a design problem we go with. But then you start also seeing over the last decade, you're actually seeing a merge between these two. The enterprise users are starting to see a lot more willingness and they want more of consumer experiences. So you give them a product that still is like you have to remember codes and like those frame relay 30 screens. They actually do not prefer that as much as they want to quickly look. I mean, you saw the latest experience that went out with the SpaceX shuttle. I mean, they just moved everything into touchscreen. Right, and think about the amount of dials that went into that. Now, is that B2B or B2C? But the aspect is consumerization is coming in, and those consumer behaviors that they used to are coming in more and more in B2B. So that's my highest level. I don't know if that was specifically what the question was, but I'd be happy to kind of elaborate further.
Yeah, we've got another 4 questions or so. So poke through some of these here. One of the questions was, as a PM, should we be spending 20 to 50% of our time, or what do you feel is kind of an appropriate amount of time spent on user experience? Is it okay to delegate some of that to an internal UX team or outsource that somehow? And what's your thoughts for rules of thumb as far as how much of the time based on your polling question?
So I'll answer that in 2 parts, right? The first part is building great experiences is a mindset. So it is something that you have to eat, sleep, and drink every day. That, how am I getting this a much better experience? The mechanics of designing that experience can be delegated, should be delegated, because then you effectively can't be doing everything. But then you actually are, you consistently are challenging yourself, like, is this the best experience we're shipping? Is there better ones out there? and so on and so forth. And I think that is the first aspect that I would say. As far as the percentages go, I will come back to that because there is the second part of it. We'll talk a little bit more into that in specificity. So I'll get back to that in some more detail. And if not, I'll surely close it out before we end today.
Okay, we've got two people ask the question. If you give an example of the difference between UX and XT for something like a smartphone app, like an iOS app.
So if you're a company that's, let me go back to that slide so that'll actually. So when you look at experience transformation, so let's say you are a founder in a company that's creating that app. And let's talk about a consumer app like Calm, which is right now a pretty popular app in the mindfulness world. So the experience transformation is how do I actually create there's a marketing team that's kind of marketing that particular app. There is a customer service product line that's actually that people are calling to. That could be on different modalities. There's a product itself where all the assets and the media is kind of put together. But if you're truly looking at experience transformation, all three departments are working together. So most times the departments are siloed, and that's kind of the fundamental problem that kind of starts with marketing is doing its thing, the sales is doing its thing, the product is doing its thing. And then how do you kind of bring that together? So you really have to kind of tie yourself down to a few elements. We'll show a technique later on that we kind of created here, what we call the experience roadmap, that actually allows you to understand a journey of a customer across departments, across those silos. So you start looking at it from a perspective that marketing is like, I will bring in a customer here, and our sales is going to bring a customer to the journey. And then this is how the handoff from marketing, sales to product would be, and from product to customer service would be. So you actually don't, self-service customer service would be the same as calling somebody as a customer service. So you start orchestrating the experience at a department level, and that's truly where you start going to the end level of truly getting the value. And then obviously UX is if you know who your consumer is and you're just focused on your end user and you're designing for them and saying that they consume 2 meditation videos last week, I want to get them to 4. That's kind of a user experience. You're trying to understand what they like, what they don't like, but it's still very much in your side.
Very good. So we've got 3 questions. I don't know how many questions you wanted to go before jumping into the second section.
I think we can just take one more and then we can close it out in the end. Maybe.
Okay, and then we can take some at the end. So the next question is, do you have some of the best practices to share in terms of leveling the journey mapping or other ways of analyzing / orchestrating the experience?
Can you repeat that question once more? So I just kind of.
Yeah. So what are some of the best practices that you might share in terms of leveling the journey mapping or other ways of analyzing or orchestrating the experience?
Okay, awesome. So I wanted to ask you that question again because that's a good segue for the second part.
Perfect. All right.
So we'll get into that and then we'll cover that. Thank you again, and I hope this is useful so far, but we'll get into some more meat into this aspects. So one thing is, I wanted to share that, a lot of times people think of design as a good to have. I've had many people stating it, and the answer is no. I mean, the data is in our face multiple times. This is a report that's kind of was done on a much more longitudinal basis for a decade. And the Design Management Institute found that design companies or customer-centric companies is a better word to use, foundationally beat S&P by about 228%. For those who love graphs, there's 2 things that you want to observe here. One is what happened during the last financial crisis. The market took a bigger beating than companies that actually were very much in tune with their customers. So this index did not take as much of a beating in the June 2008 period. And when it accelerated faster. Right. So if you start looking at that perspective, that when you know your customer and you know what they want and what makes them tick or not tick, and you kind of are orchestrating the system around that, you have not so bad falls, but much bigger acceleration speed. So a very interesting insight there, and there's also a lot more reports there. But the factor is, experiences are here to stay, and if we build them right, we will not have the market fit issues or user experience issues that we see failures with. So I'm going to share today two mindsets. These are two mindsets that I think if we can just, and I keep using the word mindsets because these are not techniques. These are things that you have to really believe in for you to kind of act out that way. And I'll share two mindsets that will be relevant in this context, and hopefully that will at least get the conversation started. It is a whole profession by itself, therefore it is what it is, but hopefully this will get us to start discussing it. The first mindset is the experience mindset. I mean, fairly intuitive, we are talking experiences, but what does this mean? This means that for every system that we are designing, it has a group of users. Every user has a group of experiences, and a group of experiences, or each experience has a group of scenarios, right? For product managers, it is no different from epics and stories if you really connect it, but you start looking at everything from a perspective like, as a company, how many experiences do we ship? Well, how many scenarios make that experiences, right? And I'll give you a thought exercise here, and this is an interesting exercise when you do it. If someone comes to you and says, give me a login screen, again, think about what that triggers in your mind. If someone comes and says, give me a login experience, think of what that triggers in your mind. Just one word change, right? When you say a login screen, you automatically are starting to think about a screen with, a password, a username, a forgot password. You start thinking about the screen of everything you've done. But when you talk about a login experience, could it be biometric? Could it be touch contactless? Could it actually be single sign-on? You start thinking from a very different perspective. And just that one word of using experience and everything, and actually when we work with clients, the test of us when we start looking at change management is by the time 6 months is over, can you actually start seeing people using experiences and not screens, not features? And that's actually is a simple term that kind of changes that and behavior. But then this is exactly what happens. When I was at PayPal, everybody thought we were customer centric. Everybody thought, right? The marketing side, we talk to customers. We are experiences important for sales, product design. Everyone was, but we had different definitions of it, different outcomes that we defined around it. And that's again why you don't get that outcome, right? You may have all the investments for design and PM and so on, but it doesn't come through because it is actually a alignment issue. And this is the reason why we talk about a construct of, put all the artifacts that in this profession and pull it together into a roadmap. A product manager has a product roadmap. A marketing manager has a marketing roadmap. But when you're designing an experience, do you actually have an experience roadmap? So if your user was John Smith, the plumber that you're designing for, do you actually have a roadmap for John Smith, the plumber? Right? Are you working towards saying that how am I actually giving them the best onboarding experience, best migration experience, best integration experience? And I'm thinking about that. And when I think about it, I'm not thinking about it from my silo. I'm actually thinking about it from a customer in perspective. And therefore marketing, sales, all those silos automatically merge, right? So that means migration means I may actually have to work with a partner who's going to do that with us. And the partner, how well they do it. In fact, we work with a lot of large enterprise companies, and then the foundational problem in many of these companies is the same. They don't control the experience. The Oracles, the SAPs, the ServiceNows, the PayPals of the world don't control the experience because they channeled us. They are the ones who are implementing the final last mile. And if they don't implement the experience the right way, all the designs we did for them doesn't matter because so now we have to start thinking about how do I train them? How do I certify them? That is part of my integration experience, right? And now you start looking at, oh, there's a certification team that actually I've never have spoken to. Now you start, this again changes the way you think about how you're going to orchestrate that. Just like I called out early on, when you say I'm going to do a net new banking experience, that means you have to go find that facilities person and then sit down with them and brainstorm with them. And that typically is not the norm in most companies, right? And you start looking at that. You start looking at what data do I have per experience. So in this case, every column is an experience. And you can break it down any which ways for your context. If you were to take this construct that way. So you take your user, you kind of define what are the experiences we are shipping for them. What data do I have for them, both from a user standpoint and from a business standpoint? How do I prioritize that? That actually now gets you to focus in a very different manner, and also gets you to focus as a company, not as a department, because you really need to think about onboarding. Could mean that you have to work with your media production for your tutorials. You have to work with your UX designers or UI designers for your coach marks that go into the product itself. You may have to work with your technical writing team to kind of define your online user guides, and so on and so forth. You start looking at orchestrating it in a very much from a customer end perspective. And then more importantly, when you start driving this transformation, you start looking at, you have an artifact that has taken the user, has taken their journey, has broken it down into what the different touch points and the scenarios in the journey are, what the insights that you're gathering around that. Insights are obviously coming through deep research and figuring out what's going on. And then you kind of build your roadmap, and then you kind of go and change, you kind of drive your transformation as well as your execution itself. You're looking at how am I going to concept the next best onboarding experience? Now, this is where also you'll start seeing a lot of large companies not do so well. Is Cisco, which actually has multiple divisions, is there a single onboarding experience for Cisco? No, each division has its own onboarding experience. And again, I'm not picking on Cisco just by itself, because every company does the same mistake. And think about it, we invest so much money, energy, time on kind of building this with these two major skills that have been invested in over the last decade, PM and design, and we still make the same mistakes. And that's why it's much more of an organizational aspect that needs to change from that upwards. Top down. And the last thing is to truly drive this, it needs two actors. It needs a catalyst. The catalyst, the document or the experience roadmap is the easy part, but truly means someone who actually is going to drive that. Again, goes back all the way to an organization. When an organization is structured as a CMO is different from the CPO is different from the CFO, you effectively will never get an experience transformation. You have to kind of come down from that perspective, and their job has to be that. And again, to that aspect, everybody should be eating, sleeping, and drinking. And the concept is empathy quotient should be very high in an organization for it to kind of drive experience transformation. And if people do not empathize with the people they're building for, more than likely you will always be either stuck in the UI or the UX layer, which obviously has its own value, but you'll never emerge as that company that gets out there. It's been proven so many times. And you go into an organization, we study an organization on that aspect. We quickly realize that what's the value that we can create, and what's the value they can create for their customer. If you start noticing those dynamics and those silos. So that's the first mindset. So it's all about experience, thinking about experience, and driving things on that way. It's also a system design aspect, because a lot of companies, if you look at it, this is also how design for product managers are done. Not very different from design, because product management and design kind of follow each other to a large extent in most organizations. If there's a reporting product manager, there's a reporting design team. There's a onboarding design product manager, there's an onboarding design team. But there's not really is there a product manager for a user or for a persona? And I think if you start changing it from that, because some companies do it, then you start kind of having a different structure to that. And I think that's also how you org design wise, there's an aspect to that I will also put out there, is are you designing around products and features, or are you structuring around users and their roadmaps? Right, so I'll leave that, it's again much deeper topic, but my goal is to open those can of worms, so at least everyone's starting to think through that. Right. So the next mindset here that I want to share a little bit is the inquisitive mindset, right? And you could also call it the research mindset, but it's a mindset that's constantly seeking answers. Answers around, what is my user doing? What are my, am I building the right thing for my user? How am I sensing what's happening in this system as far as user experience goes, and so on and so forth. And now, unfortunately, most companies have a very wrong skew of this particular categorization. So most companies, and I'll talk a little bit about the techniques itself, but when you start looking at formative insights, these are insights that allows you to understand foundationally, where is my customer? What are they doing? What are their pain points? what have they not told me about? Like, there actually is investment that you need to do on, like, your product was designed with an intent. Where else is your customer breaking that intent? So you want to understand why are they breaking that intent, getting into those aspects so you can formulate your next plan of action based on that data. It's a much more longer gratification. It takes a lot more time to understand and build that kind of body of insights, but it is the insights that will give you the next horizon, which kind of will take you further. But most companies skew towards summative testing, which is, I have a prototype, let's do usability testing. Let's take this in front of someone, quickly test it with someone. If the answer is, and this is, I'm not kidding you, I started my career at a company called Siemens. And at that point, it was doing handset, a lot of handset, mobile handsets. We would do summative testing. We would talk to people and say, can you add a contact in the phone? Yep, awesome. I mean, task completion 100%, and time on task is less than 20 seconds. Can you play? Can you find where the game is? Yes. I mean, again, you start looking at the design we did work for them, and that's how companies were building the products. So you were starting to look at, I built it, I solved the problem, I'm going to test it with you, but eventually they all died. You don't talk about Siemens phones these days as much as you talk about some other companies. And that's because they never really invested a lot of work in the formative side of understanding truly where is the user going, where is the market going. And a lot of the things was immediate gratification of like, I have a feature I need to ship today. And this is also the problem fundamentally between the profession of PM and design, that we are incentivized on shipping. And shipping in a more near term. And when you start doing that, then you're not looking at like, where will this product go? Unless you're a founder of the company and you're eating, sleeping, and drinking, you have the user forever. This actually is where the immediate gratification, I built this product, I tested it quickly, and I'm shipping it. It has its own value, but it's not going to be driving your next $1 billion. And then the last aspect is sensorial. You start looking at data around sensing where your experience is. Right? If you do not have the, the data around, whether that is, you can have net promoter score, or you can have different text, people inputting their, all the listening posts that you can create. Consistently you're sensing where your customers are doing. Are they happy, unhappy? Where are they going, where they're not going? And there's also methods, and some companies are doing it well, some companies are not. And by the way, this is not a B2B and a B2C aspect. This is irrespective. If you want to be customer centric, you have to do this. It's harder for a B2B company, but not doing it is not an option, because it's just the factor that you are building for customers, and the company that knows the most about its users is going to probably meet their goals much cleanly. And this is the data I was just sharing earlier, that 40% of the companies actually don't talk to their end users, and they ship it. And we see people doing this. Have had clients multiple times where like, research, no, let's not do that. Let's ship it. let's get it out there. And then when it ships and customers don't like it, then you always look back and say, I wish I had spent that 2 weeks to kind of course correct. Hindsight's 20/20, but the factor is like, if you do it the first time, it's a mistake. The second time, it's just not the mistake. It's just something that you should not be doing, given the responsibilities we have in our profession. And more importantly, if you don't call it user experience if you're not talking to the user, right? It's just a product, and we are designing it for our own thing, and it's not an experience because it's not in context to anything. And do something. The tools that are out there right now are so many. I mean, you can actually, if it's a B2C product, there are tools out there that you can rapidly put a test and a stimuli out there and get feedback in less than 24 hours. B2B is a little harder, but you still can do it in a matter of a week to 2 weeks, right? So the factor is the tools have gotten so much better, our behavior has to follow along with it, right? And for a company that says that we don't want to talk to the user for whatever reason, they're not available, or the user doesn't know what they want, that there are ways to kind of go about it. But the fact is, de-risk it, because as anything, once engineering builds it, you've already invested, you shot your bullet out of your gun, and there's not much you can do about it. So this is the time that we want to kind of go for the second poll. Tom, if...
Yeah, let me get that launched up here. There we go. So you should see this popping up somewhere in a window on one of your screens. Got the first voters are in. Just get an idea of who is dictating what products and features get built within your organization. And so we've got votes rolling in. We're about the halfway point now. So we should be able to close this out in a minute. Less than, or half a minute remaining. See, we're up at 70%. Again, you know, who decides what product and features get built at your organization? We've got most of you there. Hopefully you found the window. I'll give you another 10 seconds here. I don't have the Jeopardy music to play, but hopefully you get your answers in. You don't have to answer in the form of a question, but sometimes that's how the game is played. All right, so we've got about 80% of the folks have turned in answers. We're gonna close the poll here and pass this along. And we have a tally now that I can share out to the rest of the group. There you go.
Awesome. This group continues to impress me in a lot of ways. It's actually great. In fact, I was on a separate level. I saw this meme the other day which said, you know, what drove your digital transformation strategy, and then there was one of the options was COVID-19. So very similar, I think. But I would say with COVID-19, there is a lot more digital transformation and a lot more companies trying to put it out there. My only concern is I hope they just don't, you know, put something online and say we're digitally transformed without thinking through the experience. But this is awesome. I think folks here said 11% is the C-suite, 20% are customer driven, and then 61% are from across. Now, it's just a little interesting here, right? So I'll reflect on one item. 2% is engineers, right? And if you really look at about 20 years back, before product management and design existed, engineers were everything, right? They were the ones who could think and do really fast. And for some reason, that is not what's happening right now. We're taking smart people who go to, you know, very analytical people, they go to school, and it's hard to get to and then go through. And then, you know, they are not really driving a lot of stuff. What we have noticed is the reason they are not able to drive things is for, obviously, one is the organization structure, which is, let's keep that aside, is they really don't have a strong empathy quotient for the user they're building for. Because of the offshoring and then globalization of the teams, engineers sitting in Serbia has no real insight of that, you know, the retail banking customer that actually is struggling in United States. And that aspect is when you see that empathy not translating back to them, they don't feel the same aspect. They don't have the ideas coming out. They have tools, but the ideas are not coming out. And that's when you start noticing many companies, when they do hackathons, you start noticing the best ideas are not coming by titles. It's coming through people who understand the problem really well. And it's actually one thing to reflect on. We see, and most organizations have a bigger engineering team and obviously a smaller design team and a much smaller PM team. But again, a large workforce is not really feeling the empathy to kind of do it, even though they have the skills and the focus to do it. Just something to kind of think about. Moving on, we'll tell the story. Again, I may have already told this to you in context of my Siemens story, but, you know, once upon a time, you know, when companies were looking at moving their handsets to the next generation, you look at, you know, the problems that were defined, how do I, you know, make the screen better? How do I make it easier to type? How do we make it portable? It's very much an aspect of inside out design, where like I'm talking to people, this is what I'm hearing, and I'm kind of looking at it. So this again comes with a lot more, which research method you actually are, how inquisitively are you looking at what's going on? And obviously the product that came out of it was a fairly successful product at that point. But was it as successful as this use case where you start looking at, you know, the generation of people who have a personal digital assistant with a camera, with an iPod, and they also want to have a Wi-Fi device that they can move with the browser anywhere. And then you start looking at, you know, if you really had formative research that was going on, this was written all over the place. I mean, you start noticing people were creating, taking different devices and so on and so forth. And then obviously it needed a great experience orchestration with marketing, package building, sales, and so on and so forth. It was not that Siemens did not think of it. They probably had the same insight, but were they able to orchestrate the experience the same way as an Apple was? Right, and that's kind of is the way it is. It's not that the engineers were not good. It's not because they didn't have the ideas. If you really go and talk to people at Palm, they probably had 5, 6 other prototypes, which are fairly close to it. The touchscreen had come out in a TED Talk way before, I think 2 years before the iPhone itself came out. So there was all these nuances and interaction mechanisms were already starting to come out there. But Apple put it together as an experience. Right, and I think for the profession of UX, for sure, 2007 when the iPhone came out was a watershed movement, and then when the iPad came out was again a big aspect. But this changed the way people experience products and technology, and that kind of changed every aspect. And we all have the same, aspect in our products that we are building with. But again, you just have to have that inquisitive mindset, and then you should be able to kind of build that together and as an experience. So again, just more detail around the 3 techniques. If you're trying to understand what do users need, what are the main pain points, what are the inefficiencies in the task, that's all formative research. You kind of understand, you may actually not even know what you're looking for till you actually conduct the study, because the data tells you what's going on there. Summative, obviously you know what you're looking for. You're saying that this is my hypothesis, I'm going to test it, I'm going to get data for it. And then sensorial data that you're looking for. So you have to orchestrate this very cleanly. And investments have to be done the same way. If you're early in your product building cycle, spend more time in formative. Don't waste your time in summative and sensorial. When you're way later in your product maturity cycle, spend more time in sensorial. Spend more time in formative to kind of look at the next generation of that product. If you're in the middle stack where you kind of still have a lot of market to go and you're kind of getting that, spend your time in summative. But the fact is each one of these different techniques and methods and the very unique methods to the process itself. So making sure that you have the right people to do it. I was once talking to a fairly successful technology firm here in the Tri-Valley area. My conversation with the CEO was, who's doing user research for you? How are you building your insights? And he said, all my PMs do it. I said, okay, that's awesome. How are they doing it? They just go talk to users. Now, when you take a PM and who already has a fairly loaded plate, and then you're asking them to do all these techniques and orchestrate that and create a product roadmap, you automatically kind of start saying either the person's a unicorn that they're doing everything, or you actually are underserving yourself. But the factor is talking to a user is not user research. Right? That's just a directionality to it. But how you take that data, how you synthesize it, how you build patterns around it, that's truly where the magic comes to it, because you can interpret it completely wrong and take the whole system in a different way. So again, being very aware of these techniques and the pitfalls of these are going to be very important. When do you use them? As I said, if you're in the planning phase, spend more formative time. And a good formative study is worth it because you will get so many ideas. In fact, I say do one formative study for every 2-3 years that you're building that product. So you actually get enough of runway that you can drive it. And summative, keep doing it. You have to keep doing it every time you're building it. So you just know that you're building the right thing. And sensorial is always consistently structured there. You know what your NPS is, what your drop-off rates are. These are typically, most B2C companies have this data. B2B also needs to have that data. Like, where am I seeing people dropping off? Am I seeing people coming on onboarding and not going into the try? If they're going to try, are they not doing deeper engagement? How do I know? How am I sensing that data? And that means you have to work with other departments. Maybe you're kind of curating data between customer service and customer success, and then kind of building those metrics. But irrespective, if you don't have those metrics, then you effectively will not be, or those insights rather, you effectively will not be able to orchestrate that level aspects. Again, you're fairly intuitive, you're always looking out for data, and you're looking for, do I know more? Can I know more? And how do I know more? Right. So the 4 tips I'll share quickly. Any data you have, please share as openly as possible. helps increase the empathy quotient significantly. Post it out, share it, because that engineer who looks at this data could actually come back to you with a very different idea. A lot of companies have smart teams. The more you can empathize, you can increase their empathy quotient, the more they actually will be effective to kind of drive great experiences. Because they can come back and say, I can orchestrate this experience with this technique, and everybody can come back from this different aspects. So knowing the data and sharing the data more publicly is actually going to be a critical part to kind of drive that. The second thing is constantly talking about outcomes, like what have we achieved? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Where have we done? When a release happens, looking at scoring yourself back on the experience level and saying, did we do it better for John Smith, the plumber? And did we do it, have we gotten worse in that conditionality, right? So knowing how you measure yourself for that user is actually going to be important, and showcasing it, because that's what you celebrate, right? When you feel for the user, you actually feel not for the company, but for the user. You effectively will, bring in that A game that we all have when we actually get triggered, right? Have sessions, and this is where I love companies that do hackathons, right? Take this data and just put it out there. Say like, this is what we're seeing, and let anyone bring up their ideas and do that. Get everyone involved, and you'll get awesome ideas. And then that gives you a roadmap, that gives you your experiments and everything in that place. I just see, and honestly, you can do hackathons even remotely. I mean, it doesn't matter. You don't have to lock yourself up like, for the whole weekend and then get it done. There's still ways that you can still instigate some of these initiatives. And finally, you have to centrally track all of this. All insights have to be tracked in a single place so you know where you're doing, how you're doing. Again, back to the aspect of how do you measure your outcomes if you don't know whether you're getting better or worse, right? So a long time back, this pretty much is my last slide. So I'll just share one story here. When I was working at PayPal, one thing that I would hear consistently, and actually even after that too, because the team at Citrix was also sponsored by the CEO, was if the experience is not good, don't ship. But what is the measure of an experience, right? How do you know it's good an experience or not? And that's kind of what intrigued us to kind of go back and look into this aspect. If you know your user, you know their journey, you know what their pain points are, you can actually you can talk about them in the same passion as the user would talk to you. And then you have these artifacts that you can collate, and then you look at release by release where you're kind of mapping up or down. And that allows you, and then you actually creates a very clean, deliberate organization that drives it. Then you know exactly that if something's getting screwed up, which department or which person kind of is cascading that. And then you can have that conversation very effectively. So in summary, I think what I would say, experiences matter, experiences pay. But in order to do that, you need to bring in an inquisitive mindset and experience mindset. And it is a hard problem to do. There's no way, because many companies are not structured this way. There's a lot of antibodies and that will actually resist this. But truly to kind of achieve that experience transformation or leading with experience, you have to merge these two really well. And I get asked this question again, is it a PM's job? Is it a designer's job? Honestly, it's everyone's job, but it just takes a lot more enlightenment to kind of drive it to that level to kind of make sure that that happens. So one call to action, like any designer, right? So I think let's just build awesome products. I mean, there's so many problems out there that we need to solve. And each experience can be orchestrated, and people love it and people will come to it. And we should never build a product that never will have a market fit issue. So that's pretty much it. We can open up for the Q&A, and I'm here as long as anyone needs me.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this has been a great presentation. We've got a bunch of really good questions that have been popping in on the chat window, so I've got these all queued up. Also wanted to, while we're at it, if people can, before leaving, fill out the poll that I just launched. But I wanted to get to folks' questions, and then we've got a little bit of a follow-up of a preview of what's coming next month. So don't leave early just yet. So first question we had coming in the chat window is for companies that are kind of locked in this summative mindset, how do we avoid them locking onto that and just getting confirmation bias of proving what they already know and not actually getting any new user insight. Any tips on avoiding that?
So I think there's no real tips of avoiding it. It's truly a change management process, right? So if the company is just comfortable and like, I exactly to your point, your confirmation bias that, people can enter their phone number in this, therefore it's a good phone. People can, find the games, it's a good phone. It's a company. So there is an element of like, can you go and sequester an experimental budget for you to just say like, what if we did this? And there's companies that do that what if and, cycles. There are companies like Intuit that actually have a horizon planning where they say consistently look at, what's my horizon 3 projects that we're going to experiment on. Again, it takes a product manager or a designer or product leader or a design leader themselves can't drive this. It has truly to come in from a much more of a higher, if you're trying to go experience transformation, that's what I'm talking about. You really have to the organization has to believe in it. So that way, if you can find a way to kind of then make a case for one experiment or like, what if we actually did this differently, right? And there's so many of the reasons startups succeed is because they just start from a clean slate. That's one benefit. They don't have the same technical debt that they're starting with. But the reason is that they're starting from a slate where they're looking at the what if. Now, many companies have the resources, but they don't do the what if. Larger companies. And I think the smaller companies, honestly, if they're not doing it, that's just a classic way of, you're just too caught. But first of all, a small company getting caught in their inertia doesn't make sense. That's the fastest way to death. A large company, they can survive inertia because they just have so much of mass. But the factor is just finding the right sponsor that's all it takes. And then once you do that, you sponsor it and you drive it. But again, one aspect I've seen in large companies as we do this change management is making sure that you don't build animosity in the organization, because a lot of people still have to do keeping the lights on work. And if somebody goes and does formative and kind of thinks about something, just make sure that you are bringing people together in that process. Otherwise, you just end up everybody becomes an antibody trying to attack that process out.
Very good, very good. So I've got one larger question I broke into two parts here. The first one I thought was a very interesting problem. They were wondering, how do you, any tips on designing and testing user experiences and trying to not generate what's known as the Hawthorne effect, where the study itself causes users to act differently because they know they're in a study. So the productivity always goes up whenever they're being observed, whether they're using your product or not.
So the honest challenge is that there will be an element of that bias. That just is nature, because you're creating a controlled environment and you're kind of testing in that. The way you kind of try to mitigate that is by triangulating effectively, right? So, and we always say this, and as a researchers, or what they say is not what they do, and what they do is not what they feel. So you need to kind of be able to kind of triangulate that more effectively, because there's a hypothesis that you're testing, even if you're putting it in a controlled environment and doing it. That's why, again, summative tests have that bias built into it. Whereas formative, I'm observing you, and I observe if I'm like literally pre-COVID, we had user research studies with one of our clients where we were going to observe clients going out and doing field service work. So this would be doing solar installations. We observe them doing solar installations. At that point, truly, they are in their element and they're doing what they're doing. So you it's a formative study. So you're actually just observing and you're building data patterns. But the factor is you triangulate from a summative aspect, that you kind of test it, and then you're kind of looking back and saying, okay, now I have this hypothesis. Now, is it exactly how they are using it when it gets shipped? Or can we do a beta in between and then see how that's going to, when they're not truly in a controlled environment. And the data doesn't triangulate, then you actually have to change your hypothesis and kind of adjusting to it. So again, it's a very deliberate process. But the answer is not talking to anybody and not showing even a product in that context. You basically are even taking away that variable out.
Very good. The other half of the question that came in reminded me of an app that was recently used at a state caucus for voting, and it was developed by folks in a tech company that was located in a city. and everybody had iPhones and Android phones. And then what they failed to realize is that their primary user in the caucuses were senior citizen volunteers who may or may not have had smartphones or been familiar with it, and were in rural areas where cell phone coverage was not at the same level as they are in a city. And we saw the results of that not going so well, with it taking 2 or 3 days to get the results in from the caucuses. So with that in mind, somebody was asking, how can ethnographic research and kind of taking into account an anthropological perspective or localization and local customs and cultures, how is that brought into the user experience testing and research?
Absolutely. So in fact, if anyone wants and further details on that, you can just drop me an email and I'll make sure me or someone on my team will send you a paper we wrote on that. So it's a paper that we wrote about 5 ways you can literally screw up research. So the first part of it is identifying the wrong users, right? And we actually, when you have CEOs and founders, literally, I'm not kidding you, that call it the Steve Jobs effect, where, founders of companies are starting to run design reviews and checking with their friends and family that this is the way it should be done, and that's not research. Now, ethnographic research is actually a very much effective method that is used in the formative research technique, where you're observing them, contextual inquiry being another one. It takes time. It takes time. It takes effort. So again, it's not something that you can do over over a weekend and so on, or over Zoom. But the fact is that it pays up a lot more. The insights that you build on that is multi-year. And in fact, multi-department. It actually can drive your marketing, your branding, everything can be driven through those insights if you do it right. But it takes time. And the answer is exactly to your point. If you do not know, you cannot design a weapon if you've never been a soldier in the field, right? And otherwise you have no idea that, what actually happens. Why does a weapon, jam? You don't know all those dynamics that are at play. And either you have a soldier that has been through the missions with you, who's actually your advisor or your advisory council, or you're going to the field and testing your product out. Otherwise, lives are at stake, and in this case, time and effort is at stake. But yes, I mean, we have seen that so many times that you actually build a product for like even the experience roadmap that I shared. You're talking about the experiences and the scenarios. We actually most companies are not able to even agree on who the user is, right? And this is in a boardroom sitting with senior members, and that's basically when you realize that they don't want that. They want to still ship in 2 months or 3 months, and you kind of start noticing that the seeds of failure are already being sold, and that's basically what the challenge is. The factor is that if you don't know your user, you're just going to put a whole group of people. It's just like if you don't know your enemy, you're going to put a whole regiment or a battalion in harm's way. And at that point it's life, and this point it's complete success or failure.
Yeah. So a couple of other, we've got like about 3 questions in here. One is, and this is an especially good question, one of the things we're looking at with our website is building a list of recommended books and resources. So if folks wanted to add books to their reading list, or do a little bit more research and learn more about this, do you have any formative books or authors that you follow in experience transformation?
Nothing comes to my mind at this point, to be honest. There's a lot of books on the methods of research that's been written up. There's a lot of those elements of that. The concept of experience transformation foundationally came from the fact that the big picture is not being handled by orchestrated accordingly, right? The details are, and there's a lot of books written on how to research, how to design, and so on. But to transform truly, I mean, it's trying to merge change management with kind of thinking about the customer centricity. There's obviously a lot of books with customer centricity itself, but they've been written not from a product development and product design and product management perspective. So it's been written, obviously, how do you bring that into other aspects? So they are obviously, you triangulate that, and that's how you kind of come to it. I'll probably get back to that, and I can share that as a separate thing. I can also pool that with the team, but nothing major comes to my mind at this point that will truly get you to get all of these together.
So an opportunity for somebody to spin out a bestseller probably from here. um, final two questions I've got. Somebody was asking if you had any recommendations for tools for B2B. Getting feedback from B2B customers. I know in the old days we used to do focus groups, and now we do A/B testing with digital products. But wondering if you had any favorite tools on the kind of collecting data from B2B.
I think there are quite a few, right? So if you start looking at creating, so the first part is, for any research you need. So wait, B2B, if you want to do summative or you want to do formative. If you want to do formative, there are no tools because you have to go observe people on there, and then you kind of extract that and you're building your journeys. They are, and then you kind of synthesize that with tools like Mural or Miro, or there are tools like that that allow you to do that. Summative testing, there are tools, of course, but that summative testing is only as good as the stimuli you're providing to kind of people to react to. So even if a B2B, you can put the stimuli up, and there are tools out there like usertesting.com or userzoom.com. There's a bunch of the tools like that. Every month there's a new tool that comes up that you can put the stimuli, and then you can send it to your users and they can react to it. And you can also, with some of the prototypes that are being created, you can actually instrument it in a way that you can get people to use it, and then the data is automatically getting logged for you. Now finding those users is hard. For those, there are tools like respondent.io, which is one partner we use very much. But effectively, you kind of have to recruit the users, give them the stimuli, and tools for that exist. So I think that would be the B2B. B2C is obviously, again, anything formative, you have to go in the field. Anything summative, there are a lot more tools coming in. Sensorial, obviously, a lot more tools coming in with Pendo, and there's a bunch of tools that if you can instrument it right, and that's also a whole process, but that also is kind of doing really well.
Very good. So I've got our final question and then a little bit of a wrap up. So one of the questions here reminds me of the quote that's attributed to Henry Ford, that if he had asked his potential users what they wanted, they all would have said they wanted a faster horse. So sometimes what the customers think they need is not what they actually need. And so this question was more around, how do you discover or uncover the real needs of a customer? There's some sources you can tap into in the support channel, social media comments, polling. Are there other strategies or techniques that you might use, or sources that you might pull to discover those unmet needs where they're not sort of locked in the box of what they currently have?
This is actually, as I say, I mean, if you have high empathy for the user, if you ask me, what Steve Jobs had was high empathy for what he was solving for. It was not that he understood the users well, and he brought the technology with it, and then executed a really good transformation on it. And the story that you mentioned, Tom, about Henry Ford, that has come up a lot of times in my career, and I think it's perceived a little wrong. If you ask the user what they want, they will tell you that they want a faster horse. But if you observe the user, you would actually observe a lot more different things. You'll observe that, if I had a horse gets sick. If you observe that I have a horse, that I have to move, that the horse actually gets fatigued after a period of time. If you observe that I have a horse, you observe that, I cannot take a family on it. You observe a horse, that horse has it, it has, aspects of, feeding it and taking care of it, and a shed, and so on and so forth. And that observations is what is actually much more formative. And if that was what was observed, then you start understanding, like, okay, how can I solve that problem? And then you kind of ideate and structure it this way. There's a whole topic that I also talk about, which is like the way you frame the problem is the way you solve it. And how you frame the problem comes from how you kind of, how much you empathize with the user. If you look at them like they just need a faster horse, and that gets written up as a requirement, the designer is going to design a faster horse, and then you ship it. Yes, you will sell it for a period of time, and suddenly somebody else will come in and give them something else. And that is foundationally the mindset that has to come in. If you're inquisitive, the answers are there for us to find them. And then there's a system to kind of bring it to market.
All right, and there was one last minute question that came in that was too good not to throw in here as our final. With our situation, and I'm not going to use the term unprecedented situation or whatever euphemisms are floating out there, but with this people being remote, are you seeing any evolution of user experience? It's like, oh, I can't go out into the user's house and follow them around because I'm not allowed to do that anymore. Are you seeing any innovations in that space?
So I think there's a technique that's kind of that wasn't kind of taking a lot more precedence for a while. The technique that's we have known as diary studies, where somebody is chronicling, and this is actually done a lot with psychiatrists and other people who are studying how do you behave at different points of the day, how are you engaging with it, and then you chronicle that, you journal it, and so on and so forth. You can send people a video and then say they wear a wearable video and then they kind of walk around and they're just talking around, and because people are now in a location. And therefore you can still extract data from that. And you still kind of see them in their element and so on and so forth. But again, these are basically, you're evolving the techniques to kind of get there. But the answer is, I mean, if I can't observe you, as I said, I mean, if I don't observe that you are kind of struggling every 10 miles to kind of wait and get a watering place for the horse, if I don't observe that, then I don't know that. I mean, I'm just anticipating that, yes, I mean, you went from Detroit to Ann Arbor and that was fine. So those are, I think, what I would say as some of the things. But from a formative research, if it's a B2C product, there is still a lot of phase that you can, because the consumers are around you and you can still talk to them. Yes, you can't go into their house. B2B becomes a little tricky, but B2B and essential services may actually become much more of an opportunity in this case, because if you can make it much more easier for them to be contactless and so on, and you observe all the places that they contact, they're touching or they're moving and they're engaging with, especially in healthcare, you can actually, there's whole new innovation models that will come out of that. But the answer is, it's getting harder. It's not impossible. And, yes, if you're just sitting at your home and you want to do it on Zoom, there's only so much that you can get out of that, but there are ways that you can circumvent that.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, there's certainly some new pain points which have moved up in the priority list for sure. I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and I wanted to give Devashish just a few moments to tell us about next month's speaker, so that you all get a little bit of an inkling of a preview of what we have next on tap.
Great, thanks, Tom. And thanks to Satyam for an excellent talk. And to one of his last points, I wanted to talk about next month's event, which touches upon how do you know what a customer really wants. And we're going to be having a speaker, Kristen Berman from Irrational Labs, who's going to be talking about behavioral research, behavioral science that is applied to how to find out what customers really want. The experience, as many experienced product managers might know, that when you do a survey or you ask a customer what they want, that you often don't get a very reliable answer, because what they really are experiencing is more important than what they're telling you. And so there is a field of behavioral research, behavioral science, that our speaker will be talking about the gap between what customers say they want versus how they actually use the product and what they do, and how you account for the cognitive biases that are at play and go around that to truly design products that a customer will like and they will actually use. So this is an event that will take place on July 8th, and we will have all of the details up on the SVPMA website very shortly. So I encourage all of you to join, tell your colleagues, tell your friends, and it's one more of our exciting events coming from SVPMA.
And for those of you who may have missed, if you got in late, or you knew a colleague that registered and wasn't able to view the presentation this evening. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel, and it will get posted also to our svpma.org website. So if you want to share with your colleagues some of the fantastic points that were made in this evening's talk, this will give you a good way to go back and reference this. I know frequently I run into cases where there's a great talk and about 6 months later, I'm deep into a presentation and realize, oh, what was that that they said? This is a great way. You can go back. We have 20 years of archives nearly, we're approaching, on the SVPMA website. And Devashish and I have been working to organize an index where we have, I think, 6 or 7 years left, but we have the bulk of it done. Yeah, definitely reach out, and this is a community, so we can all help each other out. Thanks again to our speaker, Satyam. Fantastic presentation. I'm sure we'll hear lots. If anybody has any anything specific, ideas of additional speakers or neat additional ideas for the website or for our meetings, our ears are always open. You can reach us at board, B-O-A-R-D, not B-O-R-U-D. Board at SVPMA will go to all the board members, and we're looking to roll out a list of books and other resources, and just kind of grow the community so that we can all help each other and learn and grow. And you know, it's a product management, and the product discipline is multidisciplinary. So you know, we've always got new things to learn and trying to understand all the different people that we interact with. So that's what it takes to make a leading product and help make the world a better place. So thanks everyone for coming, and please sign up for next month if you can. If you wanted a few closing words, Satyam.
Yeah, I just had a quick point to make. If anyone, you know, again, it's awesome whenever I talk to product managers. If anyone has any feedback that maybe like they want me to elaborate on something more, or they would like me to, you know, kind of clarify on something, feel free to send me an email message. I mean, I'm happy to kind of talk through this anytime. So we have this last year when we did the product camp, we had these cards that we were giving out to attendees. If you want one of these, just drop me an email. I'll PDF it to you, or we can send it to you if you're on the US side. We can mail one to you. So just wanted to share that with you also. I forgot.
Excellent. One more resource. Well, thanks a lot for everyone. We hope to see you next month. It's been fun and very informative.
Thanks, man.